Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. This week it's a book club episode with Patsy Peril, who co-wrote Swimming Upstream, One Man's Fight to Save the Atlantic Salmon. It's a fascinating read about a lifelong netsman on the Shannon who's been fighting to save the wild salmon for most of his life. And Tom, before we hear from Patsy and his fascinating story, it was really interesting, wasn't it, just to get that viewpoint of a netsman, somebody different that I suppose we haven't heard from on the podcast before.
Yeah, definitely. You always have to you really should listen to a viewpoint from outside your own, should we say, comfort zone. And that's why it's really important to have Patsy on and the side he's coming from. But when we were chatting about this beforehand, you said it, not only is he netsman, but, he's a guy who's done so much himself to save the Atlantic salmon. And, let's not forget this, because I think it's very easy for us as rod anglers to immediately castigate, the netsmen as the bad people. But we talk about it in the program there. I mean, a lot of the netsmen can't keep salmon and anglers can. So, yeah, it's very interesting. I've only breezed through the book, but you read the book from end to end.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I love reading the old part, the historic part. He grew up in a place called Coona in Limerick beside the Shannon. His father was a netsman. He talks about all that, just the importance of the salmon to the community, to the village. He talks about the thatched houses, so the reeds in the wintertime. So they would collect the reeds from the river in the wintertime and they would turn them into for the thatch. Like, it was just, I think he said, what was it, 7 or 10 houses in the village, thatched houses. It's like to speak to somebody like Patsy who can tell us about that. It's like ancient history nearly hearing about this. Like, to talk to kids, imagine say to them, houses were thatched and people would collect the reeds. This was what they did in the winter. And then the summer, what's it called? The winter fishing and the summer fishing, the season ran from February until July, and just the importance of that, the community and the fishing, it was so intertwined. I think we've lost that.
Like, it's very interesting to see. Right, okay. We as a nation probably did need Ardnacrusha. We had to have electrification. But yet, we as a nation and a people, we decimated the salmon in the biggest river in the country.
And we've covered it before, the Castle Connell fishery and attempts to try and bring that back. And, and even I don't think they'll ever do anything about Ardnacrusha, but yet I think it gives us a 2%.
I think it's at 2% now, yeah.
But it's to hear Patsy's story, and Patsy led a really interesting life. He'd go to London in the spring and summer, work, earn money, and then he'd come back in the winter. And, he'd always make sure he was around for kind of some of the season for the netting. So it was still a way of life for him. But the thread through all this, and you'll hear it in the interview, is he saw it himself from the 60s on, how the numbers of fish were just getting wiped out. First Ardnacrusha, then it was industrialisation, then you had hatcheries, you had pollution, you had salmon farming, you have climate change, you have overfishing.
The list goes on and on.
List goes on, and he's seeing it all. And he was absolutely fascinating to hear him talk about. So he was involved with the Netsman Association, and he was advocating then over time that they had to stop it, and they were bought out, obviously, in the end. But my God, the opposition, the physical threats against him, and everything. To hear him talk about that is that he still kept fighting, because he believed in the wild salmon. And it's amazing to talk to people like that. So anglers won't be enthralled or enthused to hear his one of his
6 points of one of his 6 points
to save the wild salmon. Close the rivers to fishing. No, that's it. Full stop.
Yeah.
So, suffice to say, I wouldn't agree with him on that. But what I did take out of it was just his passion and his advocacy for wild salmon. He got to know Orri Vigfússon, of course, of NASF, and just again,
going up on a plane,
showing him the Shannon. So it's one foot in the past, which is fascinating to hear about. It's a way of life that is gone forever. And also it's one foot in the present and the future, looking to the future to try and see what can we do to save the wild salmon. So it's something we're always advocating here. And it's well worth listening. It was a great read too. So look, let's hear from Patsy Peril now. And he first spoke to us about the impact that Ardnacrusha had on the River Shannon system.
It had two major effects, one for the general public and one for the people who were dependent on the River Shannon for a livelihood. And thus, that the people were families families totally dependent on it in certain sectors of the rivers. But in our particular area, 90% of the people in our village were dependent on it for most of their livelihood. 90% of their livelihood.
And just talk to us about that, like in terms of, because I think people might, and it wasn't a million years ago, it was 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, that how important the Shannon was for livelihoods for people. So this was fishing communities, fishermen who had boats, who had nets, who caught salmon throughout the year and sold it, and that's how they made their money.
Yeah, and they also had thatching reeds.
Yes.
And the two seasons would more or less dovetail together in the sense that when one finished, you slid into the next one,
Yeah.
So you had a double season within a season, There was money made from the thatching in the latter years, we say the 50s and 60s. And 70s, there was a huge boom in thatching in Ireland, So there was a huge demand for reed. In my younger days, there were 7 houses in the lower part of the village thatched, and there was 10 in the upper thatched. Now there are none.
Yeah.
So that's where we went with that,
Yeah. And what were the runs of salmon like say for because your dad worked
the salmon factory. He ended up in the salmon factory, but he worked in Ardnacrusha as a later stage, an ending up stage of the just prior to the opening and things. He got a job there,
Yeah.
And
but fishing was an extra way to make money as well, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was for a person who would have a permanent job, but it was a full-time job for people who didn't have any work, except for a day here and there with a farmer, So it was a full-time work for a lot of people. The salmon was, yeah.
What was the length of the season then? How many months would a fisherman get out of that part-time work? Like
the 1st of February until the 20th of July. But in actual fact, it was the 29th of July, and the fishery boards didn't make the fishermen aware of it, that they had an extra few days on it in reality, So it was to finish on the 20th of July. And
so 6 months.
That was six months, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What was there many full time doing it, or was it too hard to make a living?
Oh, it was full time. The people cutting the thatch and reed and the fishing were full time occupation. It was their livelihood.
And what were the runs like back then?
They were good. They were good because we had a river or two downriver from Ardnacrusha, which was prolific in, producing salmon, such as the Mulcair. And then you had the Mag River, and you had the Fergus and things, right? So we used to have to go further afield for the fishing, Whereas if Ardnacrusha wasn't there, we'd be able to fish right into Limerick City and get, but the runs were good.
Well, it was how communities survived, wasn't it? And the fish and the water was so important to the communities that it was entwined, wasn't it? Like
yeah, the community was totally involved. It affected everybody in the community. Farming people, right, about 10% of the occupation, But everybody. The tides, anybody could tell you when high water was going to be or low water or whatever, So everybody were in, and what one family be doing, the other family be saying, how are you doing,
Yeah.
So,
it's amazing how something within a community like that, how, and you just mentioned it there, tides were so important because they dictated your working day. So everybody is aware of them.
And the thing about it is, it wasn't a working day. You worked according to the tide.
That's
Night, dark, the day and night didn't mean a difference because there was 2 tides, and it was to stretch out as the moon phases and things used to happen, it turned into spring tides, nip tides, and whatever, and you had to know all that, because if it didn't.
And actually, just as a matter of interest, there, Patsy, how did the tide dictate how the working shift was done? Was it you set the nets at low tide, was it? Or
yeah, setting the nets now would be fixture, but we had drift nets.
Okay.
So it was very important to know the tides, the strengths, and the speed of the currents, you know. So you'd know that with the heights of the tides and whatever, and by experience, there was no way to learn it, only experiences, you know. So you just couldn't go out anytime. You had to fit in a high water and know precisely to the minute what time high water was going to be or what time low water was going to be, right? And that would dictate to you the amount of fishing you have in the ebb tide and in the flood tide. So, you know, you need to have a university education, actually, to get at it, like, you know.
Actually, Patsy, just I'm always of interest. Explain to me exactly how it works with a drift net. How did it actually work? Take us through the.
Right. And it would have a certain depth and a certain length. Legally, you'd have 135 yards. And the depth didn't really varied, but you had to have legally a specific size mesh, because if your mesh was too small, you'd let nothing go through. So you had to give a certain average fish, would go through your net.
Unless what was the mesh size? Can you remember, or the average?
I know,
mesh?
yeah. You had two actually nets, one for the summer fish and one for the winter fish, we call them, right? And the winter fish would have a 7-inch mesh.
Oh, wow.
And you know, a mesh is diamond shaped, right? There's 4 lines in it. So the 4 lines you divide them, add them together, divide them in half, and then you would say a 14-inch, a 7-inch mesh, you know?
Right.
So you know to get the fish as well, like, you know?
Yeah.
By it.
And the summer one then was how many inches?
Sorry, Tom. 5-inch, legally 5 1/8, and you had a 5 1/4, right? But then again, what happened was with the change of technology, an island net has elasticity in it, right?
Yeah.
So to enforce the law, all you had to do to explain it to the judges, take him in and mesh in it and pull it, and you'd see that you had a 6-inch mesh. Whereas with the ordinary the ordinary hemp net wouldn't have any strength in it, yeah. And then the technology of the nets come into play as well. The durability would be the nylon nets would last longer than the hemp nets, because
I read that you said that hemp nets sometimes would have to be replaced every 2 years,
and at least 2 years, and sometimes it would go on a year.
Oh,
you
wow.
could catch in it, and and the durability of it wouldn't even last you a year, like, you know.
And it was interesting. You said while there wasn't a lot of money spent on the outdoor gear, the best money was always spent on the hemp nets.
The best money was spent on beer.
What was the runs? So, like you said, you had the winter fish.
Oh, sorry.
Like, what were they like in terms of kind of was that what sizes were you getting?
Yeah, prior Ardnacrusha, which shut down the fishing for about 2 years here in 1932 when they actually opened. Within a year or two, the people were half of them went to England or whatever, like, you know, from the experience of the year before. Very, very little fish, but there was heavy runs, good runs prior to Ardnacrusha. And after it took a while for the people to get confidence again in the numbers. They came up a bit. Like I said, it was the rivers downstream that maintained the income that we did have after Ardnacrusha, the early years after Ardnacrusha, until we had a big change again on the 1960 when the Ardnacrusha hatcheries came into play. And looked great, made good money, and the numbers were up, but it led to wiping out the true wild salmon.
So basically, what we're saying is the Ardnacrusha system, which was a boon to the country, but basically it probably eradicated the Shannon salmon strain.
Decimated the livelihoods of lots of people, like, you know.
Yeah.
Who were dependent on it. We had fishermen in O'Brien's Bridge. There was net fishermen up there. There was net fishermen in Athlone. Athlone had a huge netting fishery which only started in 1863, because back in 1863 there was big fishery legislation introduced in England, and
Yeah.
they closed down a lot of weirs and things here on the River Shannon, which, which was a good thing.
Which was a
But
good thing because it
yeah,
enabled the fish to run. It's very interesting
exactly.
to say that because you said about the Athlone. I fell down a rabbit hole here once checking, and I do that. But I found that there was a big salmon fishery on the River Inny, which flows into Lough Ree.
Yeah, I know the Inny very well because
Do
I
you?
used
Yeah.
to, yeah, I was in Abbeystool
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
a million times. Yeah, it's a brilliant, brilliant river.
There was an actual. There was and the figures were given on it, and the average size of the fish that they were netting on it back in the 1850s was something like I think between 9 and 11 pounds.
Yeah, and they would be summer fish, which would be big
Yeah.
for summer fish,
Mm.
Whereas we had fish prior again to Ardnacrusha, prior to 1932ish kind of, would be 30 pound weight. And now we had a 30 pound weight fish, you'd make the news in Moscow.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And was you come here, Patsy? Was your father at that stage? Had your father fished it prior to Ardnacrusha?
he had a connection with fishermen in Kinvara and would have done a little bit there or whatever,
Right.
So that's why when he came to Kona, he
Okay. Yeah.
was he was able to adapt to the system we had here.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
and then my mother was from a fishing family, you know, the Kinneys, which were, in the village donkey's years, like.
And what I'm fascinated with Ardnacrusha, because obviously for the country it was an incredible achievement, feat of engineering. It brought electricity, it brought power to the country. It helped kind of, I suppose, establish the modern free state. And the incredible thing reading in your book, Patsy, is Kuna didn't get electricity until the 1950s.
I remember as a kid with the ESB poles that have them up in a pyramid line flat. And even though we were kids, I was 9 and 10, we were able to, a bunch of us would maneuver those poles around and make seesaws out of them. And they were creasered with pitch black tar,
Yeah.
And we'd go back into the water and be cleaners for a month. But after coming off this, we'd be sitting on them, and there'd be five kids at one end and 5 kids at the other end, and really got up into there, and an odd person would be screaming, going home to mama bawling to fall off.
But do you remember when electricity arrived and the kind of impact on what it was like?
Yeah, well, we were in the thatched house at the time,
Hmm.
and because of the numbers of thatched houses and things, we weren't going to be a huge profit to DSB. So the only thing was there was only a couple of the local farmers that were forced to get it so as they could get the milking machines. And once they got it in, we were they gave it to everybody, But we were in a thatched house, so we used to have the paraffin oil lamps. I can still remember setting them up myself and lighting them, and the wick and scissors clipping them and all that. But it was late, and we had afraid on account of the thatched houses, the people were afraid to get electricity in, because some of the
Yeah.
houses you would have to put in anchor points to take the cables, and the cables were hard, and they'd pull over the cable in, so the houses weren't even able to take the anchor points to get in
Right.
the water, or to get into electricity.
I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like to be able to just flick a switch,
Yeah.
or in the kitchen for your mum to be able to flick a switch, and you have a cooker or whatever. Like, was it?
Oh, it was we used to fight to know who'd put on the switch.
Ah,
We'd be playing it, and I say a lot of switches got broke because they were made from bakelite things, a different plastic type of thing back then, and they were fragile enough. And if you hit them with the handle of a brush or whatever, the whole caboodle would go in bits,
Patsy, it was fascinating to read. Like, you were so obsessed with the river and the salmon that essentially growing up, your life was, it kind of mirrored, like you said, the salmon in many ways. So you would head off to London for the summer months, get a job wherever, earn a few quid, have a social life, and then the winter time, you'd always come back to Kuna. You'd always feel the calling to come back home over the winter time. Is that right?
Yeah, I had a terrific life like that. It's another, I might be here today, right? And Jesus, nothing happening,
Yeah.
and you'll be gone. And it wasn't strictly, start of the fishing season or the end of the fishing season or whatever. Midstream in any of the seasons, I could take a fig area, as we'd say, right? And head off, and come back in the middle of the season or after a season, because if the season wasn't going good, you wouldn't go to hang around either.
Like you said, was it over the decades? It was getting harder and harder to try and earn a few quid from the netting, was it?
It was the decline. We could see a decline in the word go, like, since Ardnacrusha,
Mm.
that gave us a lesson. And a lot of people were getting very shaky about, staying on in the fishing because they weren't making the money in it that they should be making and could make, So you'd have maybe 9 boats fishing in one season, and maybe 3 or 4 boats would do well, and
Right.
some of the other boats average, and then you had a couple of boats disaster, like, very little income out of it, So the confidence was lost in the fishing then.
When just back to that post Ardnacrusha. So basically, when Ardnacrusha was built, there was no facility installed to to allow salmon to run upstream, was there?
Yeah, you had two locations, two geographic locations in which the facilities, and both of them were acting as 100% DOMs across the rivers of the locations they were in. So you had two locations where fish were unable to continue on their journey to migration to reproduce themselves.
Yeah. So like there was two complete barriers put
Yeah,
across for the
yeah,
migratory fish.
yeah. One was actually you need a picture in your mind there, or a map or whatever, to really understand it. The geographic location of the two dams, even though they were on the one river, both of them impacted on each other big time. The one in Bort Hill, which is way upriver of where the power station was, there was an inbuilt, which was built during for the Ardnacrusha scheme, that dam in Bort Hill. There was a ladder made, steps, like you're climbing the stairs from pond to pond to pond. One swim out of one pond, climb up to the next one, climb up, and you were through. But then the ESB had a law that was only allowing the smallest amount of water that you could into that part of the river, right? So the fish that arrived there didn't have enough water to go up the river past that dam, because the ESB had the water diverted to Ardnacrusha. Now Ardnacrusha had no pass in the downriver of Ardeen in the
Right.
powerhouse. They had no pass there until 1959, 1960. And they built that in conjunction with building the hatchery. So it was self-interest mostly that came into play,
Right. Yeah.
because they wanted to maximise the benefit from the hatchery, because DSB put the hatcheries in so as they could catch the fish in another dam that was downriver. And the only dam in the world that was allowing no fish whatsoever to go through, which was the Tumen Weir, which supposedly was to open on a weekend. And they commercialised the catching of fish there for their own benefit, and had a law saying we can take 28% of the fish going into that fish weir. A dedicated fish weir for commercial fishing. ESB put that in, even though the Shannon was in a horrendous state, thanks to what they've done. And that's where the problem still lies in the Shannon, because the legislation that allowed it to do all of that still exists. And there'll be no solution, if things were normal around the rest of the North Atlantic, in Greenland or wherever, right? We still have a problem here on the Shannon estuary, in the Shannon
Yeah.
River. and the Brosnas and up along to Athlone and the Innies, right? They'll never see salmon again unless the people in the Dáil, the TDs, and you'll see them getting their photo ops of hatchery fish. Of farm fish now. You will see ministers for fisheries appear in the newspapers, you know, with photographs promoting salmon farms. So, and DSP really were the death knell of the wild salmon in the Shannon.
And I suppose even the fact that the introduction of the hatchery in the 60s, Patsy, was pretty much accepting and an acknowledgement that the wild salmon numbers weren't there, you know, like because of what had happened before that. So you got involved then, you started getting involved with the Netsman Association, was it? You started getting involved in kind of activism, was it?
That's it, yeah. We've been younger at that stage as well, right? We thought we were going to bully the government into whatever, like, you know, we had marches in the streets and the whole lot, you know, and told our TDs off and whatever, right? But it was like water off a duck to those people, like, you know. We got over with that, you know, because they had the forces of the state behind them or whatever, and they were able to manipulate the media and the whatever, like, you know. Even though I must say about the media, in my time of involvement and in it, the newspapers and RTE, I would have to say, TG Cahir and Radio Nagartata, they all gave a fair and balanced. When there was a big campaign going on by angling people and the whole lot to stop the drift netting and things like, you know, or the overfishing and the poaching and the illegality. The papers give fair coverage to everybody, you know, on both sides of whatever the argument was, you know.
Actually, Patsy, just on the stop the drift netting, was it a hard argument to put across to your members over time to accept it?
To start off, it was an impossibility to do it with fishermen, because automatically they didn't want to see the light at the end of, you know, it's very, very hard to convince them that the salmon were on their way out. And unfortunately, the proof is there as I'm sitting here. The salmon are as good as gone. We have only 10 minutes left in the clock as far as, you know, trying to get salmon back and securing the wild Atlantic salmon. So to get those people to, you know, to say, right, because how do you tell a man, you know, we're taking your job off you, right? Now, but I looked at that as not a permanent situation, but a temporary, give it a year, give it 2 years. The people who are coming out and destroying our livelihood were the illegal fishermen in the whole, because it was a free-for-all with the drift nets on the coast. Thousands of boats, there were only 700 boats legally entitled to fish on the sea and around the coast. And there was thousands of boats. One area in Kerry alone had 300 boats, whereas the location, the same location, was only licensed for 30. And there they were. And then again, you know, the state did try to stop them. We had fishery officers who lost their lives performing their duty trying to save the wild salmon. We had Navy people who got injured. We had guards who got injured, and we had fishery officers who got injured. Now, our government failed then. That's our TDs. So, you know, I'd have to start courses at this stage out to let you know my feelings, like, you know, about how they let the thing go. No, but we have a chance now, right? If the descendants of these people who are in the Dáil then, and some of them it's a family affair for them, they need to act now. And they can't be going around into a newspaper showing a salmon farm. I want to see a wild salmon in the minister's hands. And that's the Minister for the Marine, who's a local TD here where I am, you know, who has that job. And if he has that mind of a mentality at the moment, he doesn't know what kind of a fish he's promoting, that has 70 diseases at least in them, we're in trouble.
Well, it's salmon farming is something we've covered a lot, Patsy, on the podcast here because we're fully aware of the dangers and the pollution and the practices and even the unhealthy aspect of the food itself that's being pushed on an unsuspecting, uneducated, uninformed public. And politicians, like you said, are doing the photo ops, and you have one government department is pushing it for negligible economic gain or negligible job
Short
creation.
term and
Exactly. And look, we've seen it all before. And, it's like anything, I suppose, you go back 50, 60 years, Patsy, in terms of kind of the government politicians, actual willingness to deal with the situation is pathetic to say one thing. Talk to me about in terms of just when you, I suppose, like, so you had the industrialization, say, of the 60s, the wild numbers going down. And the salmon farms came in. That was another kind of death knell for it. Like, did you ever kind of just give up and just say, oh, look, it's not going to happen. I just, I'm going to take up golf. I'm going to do something away from fishing and salmon, or was it always just you couldn't give it up?
no, it was the freedom of it. I think was my attraction.
Mm.
You were your own boss. Even though I was willing to take orders from people, uh, you were your own boss, and you were, and then again, just as an afterthought here, I was single, right? And I didn't have any direct family responsibilities myself. So if I had a family of my own, I would have had to bite the bullet and say, good luck, goodbye. The fact that I had the freedom of being able to choose what I wanted to do myself, that's what made me stay with it. But I did make life-changing things because I was free and easy in the sense that it didn't matter to me what time a pub opened or closed. I'd get in somewhere or wherever, and they'd be blazing away at it. So I gave up that in 1980 and, I never looked back since. I had a real life after that. Prior to that, you think you're great, you're having your drink and you're going out and having fun and whatever. But there comes a day of reckoning, and health-wise, it doesn't last. It won't last forever. You won't be around and have your senses about you.
Won't be around to enjoy life, really.
Exactly, because real life is you don't have to be getting fermented be, food into you.
Oh,
What was the moment for you, Patsy, when you said enough was enough?
Yeah, I woke up one morning at 6 o'clock, the 20th of July, and that was, I said to you, the end of our fishing season. And I
yeah.
fished fairly hard in the whole lot. And I had a Woodbine cigarette butt as a smoking guru, right? Very few people will remember the Woodbines. Will's
I smoked
Woodbines.
them.
Will's, they were the best cigarette ever. So I had that, hang up my window, the room, right? Beautiful summer's day. Morning, six is kind of sun was up and to the fag. I said, I don't have a penny in my pocket. What did I effing will do was,
Yeah.
with the hard work I'm after doing back, and that's it.
That was it.
That was it, yeah. And luckily enough at the time then I had a friend, a lady friend, not kind of, but but a lady friend who was in the local club, and she was love rowing and things, and we used to pop down the river, and I'm showing her to row, and she to the islands and things and she was in the flying club. She says to me, would you like to fly, so in the exchange for learning her how to row the boats and whatever, she bought me my first introductory flight on an airplane. And, and I'm looking not back, I'm looking down ever since.
That is amazing. And actually, that ties in. I wanted to ask you about Orri Vigfússon, how you got to know from
Yeah.
The NASF. Tell me this, because there's a great point where you met him and he came into Limerick, but you were actually able to fly up in the plane with him
Yeah.
and actually fly over the Shannon,
Oh.
and you could actually show him the river, the breadth of the river, the landscape. Talk to me about that.
I can remember that day, right? It's the 90s, as if it was yesterday. So I had known about him coming around and whatever, like, and even though I never had any serious animosity with angling people, right, or whatever, right, he was known as an angling kind of a person as well, right? And there was a divide, which I would consider an imaginary, between the netmen and angling people, because both of them looked at each other as, oh, you're the problem. You're the problem, like, And so he became as a kind of, and looking at some of the stuff he was reading and whatever, right? And an England friend of mine did, right, said, Orri Vigfússon is in Limerick, such and such a thing, like, oh, yeah, we'll have a little chat. So I got talking to him, and uh, he actually had an interest in aircraft himself in Iceland. And he was by profession a guy, a brewery. He had a spirit brewery. He used kind of vodka and whatever, like, So he was at the right end of the drink. I was at the other side of it. But anyway, we got up and, and we got on great. And I was at some of the meetings he had, and we ended up going to lots of meetings afterwards. We went when I got to, more or less agree with what his plan was. It wasn't a permanent cessation of fishery for people, but a bit of a moratorium. And, if numbers come back, let the genuine fishermen fish. So he was delighted with the flight that day. Ever since then, we were friends, and unfortunately, he's passed away at this stage, like, But he was an outstanding man. But we had our own outstanding men as well here, right? And there were good angling friends of mine as well. Eddie Power from Clonmel. He was one of the fishermen angling leaders. Ted O'Riordan, Kerryman, good angler and conservationist for wild salmon, So, and we had Anthony Kearney from Ballinasloe. And then we had a guy who had his own private fishery down in Wexford, Declan Hearn, who was a real advocate and a real person fighting to save wild salmon. All those people knew the salmon were on the way out, So we had our Orri Vigfússons as well,
And you need people like that. I get the sense, though, just from what I heard about Orri, is he was a real bridge builder, and the very fact that you were saying,
yeah, straight.
He met up with you and he was willing to kind of see how, he could join forces, I suppose, wasn't it? And
It gave you the solution to it, like, because it couldn't keep going on the way it was going, like, And unfortunately, he wasn't 100% successful, because anything has been done. We have people killing salmon, and unfortunately, I would blame the minister, because when ministers don't do the right thing, you will get people to take advantage of it for their own personal greed or whatever, right? So people killing a wild Irish salmon in an Irish river and be given tags by government to make it legal, right? And that same minister, the way, you're going to be happening and stuff. But that's insanity as far as the survival of wild salmon is concerned. And then you have local areas again of supposed netmen. Any real netman should not kill a salmon, knowing the state that they're in now, and neither should any angler kill a wild salmon. A wild Irish Atlantic salmon. This is extinct in 45% of rivers that was turning out millions of fish in Ireland. Millions of fish in rivers that now don't have one salmon in them. And where's the sense to that?
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear that, and and you cannot really argue against it the way things are at the moment, Patsy. It's you know, really, it's a heartfelt statement from you, and I think a lot of salmon anglers have a think about it because the numbers are in a perilous state. As you said, it's vastly approaching. It is approaching extinction, and we do have to think that. But I just want to ask you one thing, and it's moved on from that now. You touched on the animosity there that probably whether you say it's an imaginary line between rod anglers and the netsmen. I've always wondered how did the netsmen view the likes of Orri Vigfússon?
A few really took to him the same as I did, like, and they were open and broad-minded enough, and he would have other friends among knitmen like myself, but a lot of them were set in their own ways. They didn't think for themselves, and a lot of them went along with whoever made the loudest noise,
Right.
and of course a lot of the meetings took place in pubs, like, it was a turbulent time anyway, when he was around, because you had people shouting and arguing, not precisely because he was there, but there was a problem. There was an illness in the fishing, the salmon. It was a disturbing time because people were being misled, and the whole lot. The fact is they weren't making a livelihood from it. And you had people telling point blank lies that, oh, there's no problem with the fish. There's plenty of them there. If we've done this, if we've done that, if you kill the seals, oh, there'll be plenty of fish there. It's the seals that are, no, it's the codlins, someone else would tell you. And I saw three of them last week, and he was doing, one seal was doing this and the other seal was doing that, But he didn't see what the trawlers were doing. Illegal fishing, people from Ireland and from further afield.
And tell me this, and I think you touched on it there. Would there, amongst the old netsmen of old, would there be a slight resentment there that they see, right, they've been stopped totally, whereas a rod
Mm.
angler is still allowed to kill fish?
Yeah,
Would there be
but
a bit of
yeah,
resentment
yeah,
there?
yeah. Strange enough, right? A lot of the people who had been in it a long time and were under the retirement situation, right? Now, that didn't influence them in their opinions, but it was mostly some of those people, right, that were willing to go along with a moratorium in the fishing, give it up for a while or whatever, like, and they were reasonable and you could talk to them. But it was younger people that was creating the noise. And, they were saying, oh, we had plenty of fish, there's still plenty of fish there. What are you saying, that there's no, the fish are not there? That was the kind of argument that was going on.
Did you get much animosity, Patsy, from the Netsmen because you were advocating and pushing for to end it?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to. It's not this program to go talking about it, right? It could be in another forum where I would really come out and tell you stories that you might not believe, kind of thing, right? But I did meet opposition. I did meet threats. I did get the letters anonymously that I saw was written by children at writing for their fathers. And the fact that I could see in a letter, this is a child was writing this, and it's his dad is sending this anonymously, you know.
My God.
So that kind of, and I did have an episode or two in which I did have an involvement with the Gardaí on account of one of the threats I did see to myself personally. And that was an incident on a road coming from a meeting in which I wouldn't be talking to you now if I didn't have my doors locked in my lightest van that I used to have at the time for, because it was cabin fishing gear and all that around it.
My
So
God.
Not good.
No, and other people were not as lucky as I was.
It just shows you the depth of feeling and the
Mm.
hatred and the animosity when you try and change things, isn't it like that?
Yeah, but the numbers of those people who will go to the ultimate extreme are very rare, thankfully, but they can gather people around them and do it in their presence, and that's the funny thing about it, because they find themselves compromised and you're for various reasons get involved. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very scary. And then Patsy, even afterwards, because obviously, when people thought, okay, I'm thinking salmon anglers here, like drift netting was gone. It was when it was over, it was banned, it was stopped. This was it now. The salmon numbers were going to be coming in the rivers, and obviously we saw that didn't happen. It wasn't the panacea, it wasn't the answer, and then it
Mm.
kind of hit home. Oh, actually, there's other problems. It wasn't that the netsman causing the main problems. Was there bitterness afterwards then? Because when it was seen that the banning of drift netting didn't actually solve a huge amount.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the argument was lost by the people who wanted to stay on and say, right, there's no fish there, there's no problem. You're telling lies. No, we're telling the truth or whatever, right? Doesn't exist anymore. I'm freely at ease. And all fishermen, you see, there's no argument at the present day that's saying there's fish there, why are we not being left do it? Now, having said that, you will get one or two people to say they still maintain the line, but the animosity isn't there, and the vehemence and the physical in your face thing is not there. It's you're a friendly chat about it.
Mm.
But during the time that I was speaking about for the rough period of time, right, we did have scientists, fishery biologists and whatever in this country. I have to say that, right? And it's not in the single, it's in the plural, who were supporting that lie that salmon were safe, wild salmon were safe in Ireland. And I don't see any of them around now saying there's the conservation level is on the Shannon is great. We have an abundance of salmon this year. We have an absence of looking at a salmon. To catch the first fish of the year now, you're halfway through the year. You would have been caught on the 1st of January
Yeah.
Outside Euston Station in Dublin,
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, just on that, did you ever fish angling like as a recreation?
Well, I have a drawer here beside me, and believe it or not, I have angling salmon licenses in it. Right? No, not that I know an awful lot about them. The nearest I got to catching a salmon was being alongside Shawnee Quinlivan, who was was a salmon rod fisherman in Limerick. But fly fishing, I wouldn't have a clue about, because I was catching little fish at 4 and 5 years of age in our local little brickyards where they used to make bricks, which was just closed down. There used to be a roach and perch in there. And we'd go down with a safety pin bent, and we'd go down with a bit of dough, which is in a slice of bread, the white section of a slice of bread.
Yeah.
It's the dough, it anyway. We'd be using that, and we'd wet that, right? And we'd put it on the end of a safety pin that you'd have bent up, right? And we'd have that night, and we could come home with, if we stayed there or whatever, the older guys would be there showing us and catching them with us, perch, right? And roach. And we used to even have the names mixed up of a perch and a roach. We didn't know which was which, And we were bringing home roach, and we thought that they were perch, and we were bringing home perch. So we had that rivalry between each other as kids of catching little fish. But I have a couple of rod licenses, and I have a couple of permits. That I got courtesy of people to fish in elite locations, we call it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be fishing with King George or Charles, as they call him, But actually, he was a number one friend, believe it or not. And I hate dropping names of Orri Vigfússon. And he used to hang out with Orri Vigfússon up on the rivers in Iceland.
Right.
And he used to have great weekends up there.
And actually, I suppose, funny, Patsy, I suppose, like, for you and, your dad and the communities of netsmen and the river was, catching salmon was as a lively, it was a way of earning money. It wasn't a recreational thing. It wasn't a time for sport. It was serious. Like.
It was. And the thing about it, it was a job. We enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was a sport up to a sense. It seems like, and there was good camaraderie and the whole lot used to go on. When we were there, we'd have a great crack in the boats, a couple of boats to get together, and whether you had fish or not fish, and guys would share out what they have. If you came out and you didn't have cigarettes with you or whatever, right? Pull across the river, down the river or whatever, and if a guy had cigarettes, you get them. And a bottle of stout if you felt like it, maybe,
Finally, Patsy, I want to ask you just about, obviously, the last part of your book is your 6 steps to save salmon.
Yeah.
Controversially, one is you say no fishing, nothing, full stop, close the rivers, full stop.
Yeah, well, then again, it's over a period of time. It's not a permanent time, right? Now, they wouldn't have to stop fishing straight away, but definitely we would know whether we were going to go back killing fish in 10 years' time, if there was an abundance. Because if fish come back, salmon come back, you're going to have abundant times of abundance as well with them, so what do you do with them then,
You might just take us through the other steps as well, just so people know. Just
because I actually do notes on those,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's one thing anyway, right? In case I would miss on it. We're talking about what you mentioned there about stopping the fish, and hangers wouldn't like it and the whole lot, right? Now, we will have to stop the fishing, the commercial fishing that is going on in Greenland. Greenland has a commercial fishing which they're given quotas, and how they can arrive at a quota is beyond me, because they don't have any rivers of consequence producing wild fish. So we have a commercial fishery in Greenland. And here's the report for last year, the official report from the government of Greenland. And it's under the auspices of NASCO, the North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organization. And the report is covering last season's fishing that they done. The report on the salmon fishery in Greenland. It's a salmon fishery in Greenland, in which they use the lovely word down here in the contents, telling you what's within the report. 1 month, a subsistence fishery. Total nomenclature that is a lie. It's a total out-and-out commercial fishery where they have salmonids soaking. In other words, it's fixed engines for the full season, and seasons are just plucked out of air because it's the feeding grounds of salmon where we're in, where they're catching the fish. So,
is that all locals? Is that locals, Patsy? Who are you doing that?
Yeah, we have it's the Denmark element is in this as well, right? And the largest fine that the EU ever issued against a fisherman was to the head of the leader of a Danish fisherman on White Sea fisheries, right? He was fined 27 million euro of a fine. Now, he had a few boats or whatever, right? And he contravened some laws of the EU, and coincidentally, he had quotas, that same fisherman fines 27 million of fish in the Irish waters. So he was able then, by whatever means, he had the means anyway of getting the law, getting the case reversed, and we let off then with something else. on his appeal, but he was fined 27 million in the whole lot. Well, now, the fishermen he leads are still in Greenland. So we have boats from Greenland fishing the seas in the vicinity of, we have boats from Denmark fishing the seas, and the organizations and law for the fisheries in that area goes back to Denmark. So we have an EU country who themselves are churning out hatchery fish by the million, which is part of the fish that they're actually catching in Greenland. So the Greenland fishery is a salmon ranching situation, apart from its other irregular stuff that's going on. So anybody that wants to get an up-to-date on the Greenland fishery, what's actually happening there, is all contained in that. And they have even one element here in this: catch reports during the fishing season, licenses and catch reports, regulatory measures, and it says in the regulatory measures, interviews with non-reporters. In other words, people who don't report their catches, these guys come along and it says, would you like to talk to us, and we'll put this into the report. 80% of the fish that was being caught in Greenland a few years ago of the salmon was being unreported, and they have quotas in the 30s and 40 tons or whatever. So you can translate that into salmon per ton, and you'll find out that you have a fair amount of fish that we only we're pretending that we know about, but the actual figure is unknown, because some boats can have 15,000 salmon. A boat went into Burtonport in Donegal during the period of our illegal sea fishing had 15,000 salmon in its holds. These guys have their nets in the water for 6 months of the year.
It's a real Wild West, isn't it, Patsy?
Speedboats.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's real Wild West.
Can I actually just on that Danish story? I just looked it up. Can I just read out from this?
Yeah, please read it. If you have the same document there, have you?
No, this is just online. This is from media reports about the fine and the case. Right, I'd never heard of it. This is absolutely fascinating. And just sorry for correction, Patsy. It wasn't 27 million. It was 37 million. Could you believe that?
I don't. Right. Yeah.
Danish fisherman Henning Kjeldsen has been found guilty in what has been called the largest criminal case to date in Danish commercial fishing. He was fined 7.2 million for violating the rules on fishing quotas from 2013 to 2019. In addition, 8.6 million will be confiscated in one of his companies, but a total of 21.7 million will be confiscated from the fishermen's front companies. All convicted in the case appealed the verdict for acquittal. While the verdict was handing down, he expressed frustration. The trial started in 2020. According to the prosecution, several other fishermen have each acquired fishing quotas in companies that were in fact controlled by Kjeldsen. A total of 10 people were charged in the case. Kjeldsen owns Denmark's largest pelagic trawler of just over 90 meters, which has around 10% of the Danish pelagic quota. He currently lives in Skagen. He was blah, blah. According to, he has a fortune of 216 million euros. He's not only Denmark's richest fisherman, but also among the richest people in the country. Just shows you the money.
And a lot of that money was Irish fish.
But the only thing I would say, Patsy, and this is the argument I've always had, is, and I think it's right. Like, I do believe, and obviously, we need to take measures for the freshwater in terms of kind of habitat conservation, all that kind of stuff. But it's like we've outlined, I think, Patsy, you can do all what you want, which is well and good. But the reality is so much of the damage is being done out in the oceans where it's a Wild West, isn't it? And I think that's the biggest problem that we're fighting against.
And here it is again, right? The politicians I'm actually talking about, who can call the United Nations politicians as well. It's a job for the United Nations, right? It's not going to be controlled or get. I know there's no respect for law and order around the country now, around the world as we see it, as I see it. So it's a job for the United Nations to enforce the law of the sea. The law of the sea is not being enforced, not even here in our own country, from stories that I'm getting from fishermen who are at the cold face. There are things happening in the Irish fishing area in all aspects. One aspect is the qualifications of crew members or whatever, like, in boats. They'd want to have a look at all of that and get it right. But the overall problem with the overfishing, half the fish in the world, we're only down to half the number we had, say, 30 years ago, So if the United Nations doesn't step in and take control of this and do the job of enforcing the law of the sea, the laws for the law of the sea, that's where it all hinges in it. And the sea, I don't have to tell you, is the commons belonging to every human being on this earth. They think, and by right it should be, but there's one country, apart from all the rest, who are very important in this. President Trump signed off, put into legislation, a grab, not an ungrab in Iceland and things, right? He's also grabbed the seas around his own country for aquaculture. Now, Biden and himself supposedly are at loggerheads with each other, as we see every day, supposedly. But in 2020, before he left office, Trump wrote out legislation for vast areas of the United States Sea around the coast where fishermen are trying to earn a livelihood, reserved it for aquaculture. So aquaculture is the big thing in America, and he has whatever, right? But when he has already signed that off in law, that he has commanded that on behalf of the American government for the purpose of reserving it for the use of aquaculture. And at any time he can euphemistically pull the trigger on that and say, this is what we're going to do. But the Biden situation then is, we are being told in the news, they won't sign off on each other's legislation. But unfortunately on this, within 5 minutes of Biden taking over office in 2020 from Trump, he signed off the legislation to confirm the grab of the seas in America for aquacultural purposes only. So these guys can get along together when Big Pharma and the big 1%ers that are running the world financially are getting their way. So where's the United Nations there and that? The Commons is being stolen right from under the feet of the people who have the right, should have the rights to it.
It's a scary world, all right, Patsy, to which I'd also unfortunately add 70 million Americans voted for Trump. So sometimes you get the idiots you deserve,
Yeah.
And until, and you've had your, what it's like when you're dealing with, when you're trying to change things and when you're dealing with opposition and what it gets like. And how tough it gets. So it's, I think it's going to be an uphill battle. Very last question for you, Patsy, before we let you go. Are you glass half full or glass half empty for the future of the salmon?
It's a big job, and it has to start with the Irish government, right? And there are a few people in the Dáil, not actually, the government party or whatever, or parties, I should say, right? Have to wake up, because if we lose our Irish salmon, or wild Irish salmon, we're losing our identity. They are part of our identity of who we are, what we are. And, we have simmering stuff going on in this country at the moment that can go one way or the other. And it's the same in all countries, in England and in America as well, right? As you say, 70 million, half and half in America, kind of like, And, I don't want to see any sparks or whatever, but if they do their job, what they're supposed to be in there for, and if they have any conscience, a belief in their own worth, they have to act. And it doesn't take the whole doll. One politician to take this, because he will get the support of the rest of the government, because the people will make sure of it when they see what is going on. You'll need a leader in this, either a party, take it on or whatever, right? Now, I went to the Skipper exhibition in Limerick. They're the fishing magazine people, right? And there was a huge exhibition, brilliant. And they have held it twice now here in Limerick, out in UL, right? I saw politicians at that. Okay, I want to talk. I couldn't get an opportunity to speak to one person who I wanted to talk to. He was the Donegal TD or whatever, like, well thought of among the fishing community or whatever, right? No, because you'll have to get the agreement of the fishing community as well. And remember, the money being made in the fishing community at the moment is not being made by the actual people who are doing the actual fishing. There's very few of those there. The people in the background, there's the investments made into a whole lot. There's all one big infrastructure there now, salmon farms, fish processing, you name it going on. But it'll have to be the politicians to talk to the real fishermen to get them to say, right, let's sort it out. Because the Irish fishing industry is going over, because there's vested interests working against the good of the they're all prepared to catch the last fish, and that'll have to change.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Well, Patsy, fair play to you for a lifetime of activism and fighting for the small guy and fighting for the wild salmon. But your book is Swimming Upstream, One Man's Fight to Save the Atlantic Wild Salmon, by Patsy Peril and Deirdre Nuttall also, who co-wrote it with you.
Which I must say, the book would not be in my hands now, only for Deirdre. She is a brilliant writer.
She did a great job on it now.
She wrote a lot of it.
She did a great job.
Her.
She corralled all your thoughts and put them together. And
she went on a learning curve that I've never seen a person do. She knows more about fishing than I thought I knew.
Patsy Peril, thanks again for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thanks, lads.
Our thanks to Patsy for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.